step in Penn State's football future happening in 29 minutes. Nate Bauer already looks like he disagrees with what I just said in the opening statement. I'm Thomas Rankar, Nate Bauer, senior editor, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Welcome to BWI Live. We are talking about that. That's coming up today, and we're doing the show a little bit reverse order of what we normally do. Normally, we come on here, we talk about some news and updates, and then we get into recruiting recap of the last weekend. Then we'll get into the mailbag. But Nate has to go because he's got his fancy pants job as our veteran front office insider to go to the Board of Trustees meeting, which they conveniently scheduled at 10:30. Nate, I think they did that intentionally to mess with our show schedule.
Let's clarify some things here. It's a virtual meeting.
Yes.
So I will be watching that online. And
you'll be literally sitting in the exact same spot, just on a different correct. Zoom call.
Actually, I'll be on my porch. It's a gorgeous day in State College today, like pristine. But also this slight amendment to what you said in the opener. The actual debate, right? The executive session debate about this is happening right now. So there's 30 minutes of executive session. It's supposed to be 30 minutes. I would anticipate that running longer. And then a public portion that is set for 10:30. I will be interested to see what is actually public, right? How much of this conversation, how much of this presentation, how much of everything, right? Or is it going to be the motion is approved, click, hang up, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes that's how these BOT meetings go. So
let's get into it.
Yeah,
let's talk about what's coming up today. Beaver Stadium needs to be renovated, as Nate Bauer has pointed out multiple times. There are things from a structural standpoint that need to be done, but also this is about getting into the modern era of football with the superstructure that supports Penn State football. So this, as you mentioned, the public portion of this meeting going at 10:30, probably going to keep you longer if you're telling me that it's going to run long and it's going to start late. So we'll get more of the mailbag out of you. But what are the ground rules for what you're looking for from today's vote and the public portion of this meeting?
Yeah, I expect it to pass, right? But I think what is at stake or what's being debated is Penn State's plan, right? Is the blueprint for this? And I'm not saying like the structural, the actual blueprint. I'm saying is the path forward for how to redo the stadium the correct one, right? Is this the right way to do a project like this in the first place, right? You're dealing with a $700 million renovation of primarily the West Stands. So $700 million for a quarter of the stadium in terms of what you're looking at from the field out. There are going to be other things in the concourses and certainly like improvements made. Every part of the stadium is going to get touched on this within this $700 million. But for practical purposes, you're still talking about $700 million for a quarter of the stadium, right? For the big stuff.
Yeah.
People get shell shocked by that. And they're not wrong. But a big part of that, again, a big part of the $700 million is extraordinarily unsexy stuff. It's pipes, right. It's heating elements. It's all of those different things that go into creating the structural integrity that they need, not just for I never want to give the wrong impression as though the stadium is at risk of falling over during a football Saturday. It's not.
Right.
10 years from now, with the steel that's being used from 1930, there's some stuff that has to happen there.
It feels like there's a long overdue. So if you buy a car and you never maintain it other than maybe the oil change and like the basic necessities, there's a long overdue list of things you need to do to get the car running at optimal shape. And take a longer view of that, and that feels like Beaver Stadium, where you need to get a lot of work done to the engine. The body is rusted out or is rusting, so you need, like, there are long-term things. If you don't take care of these things, they're eventually going to come up. And so that's how I guess I've seen this particular conversation. I don't want to debate going back to, like, building a whole new stadium, because that's obviously not in the cards.
Yep.
How is this perceived versus what needs to be done to be competitive in the modern age of college football from a revenue standpoint, and how much can you squeeze out of this to then fund the next round of renovations, which obviously have to happen at some point?
100%, T. Frank. That is nail and head of the hammer right there, because this is a gamble in certain respects that you can generate more revenue by creating revenue generating amenities and seats, right? Your $600 seat license for the middle, for the 50-yard line seats right now, it can be replaced potentially by $10,000 seat licenses, right? $10,000 suites and boxes and all, the Atlanta Falcons Stadium and a bunch of other stadiums now at this point have field level suites. So you're actually on the field, open air access or closed, right? But you get to be there. Personally, that sounds like the worst viewing angle that you can have for
ridiculous. Yeah.
But also, let's be real about this. A lot of people don't care about that, right?
Right.
When you're dealing with that dollar figure, it is an impressive thing for clients, and right, it's not about fans rooting for the team. It's about a scene. And the thing that is the gamble, as from my perception, is whether or not Penn State has that market, whether or not that exists within Penn State. But overall, this is a small investment to scale, right? $700 seems like a ton of money. Yes.
Yeah.
But if it works, it unlocks the revenue generation that can then fund massive other projects that also need to be done within the football stadium.
So, and Eggman points this out. He says, it's not my place to be a resentful backseat driver, but $700 million is a lot. It's half the building cost of an entirely new stadium. When you look at some of the stadiums that have been built over time, I guess in the NFL, like, this is the conversation that I think is interesting. $700 million is a lot of money for NFL teams. Most of them, I don't want to say blackmail, but they encourage the local government to foot half the bill.
Yep.
Does Penn State have an avenue for that? Does the university have some sort of governmental backing, State College, whomever, to get additional dollars to fund these renovations? Or is this a case of this is what they can do, so this is what they're going to do based on having to acquire debt to do it, not having cash on hand to go and spend $700 million?
So again, nail on the head here, T. Frank. I anticipate that being part of the debate, that the path that they're taking of fundraising internally, and look, they're gonna look for tax dollars. They're gonna try to get some type of commitment from Pennsylvania, no doubt. Josh Shapiro, the governor, like all of those things politically that I don't have that level of expertise. Yeah, they're gonna try for that. The thing that's going to be debated is, should you stop doing this until that funding is secured? Right? Should you not move forward with this until you have some type of official public-private partnership? That's not what Penn State wants.
Is it too late? I feel like this is, I'm going to equate this to the NIL conversation, where the NCAA and people around football were like, oh, well, we can't do NIL, we can't pay players because look at the litany of issues that will pop up because of it.
Yep.
And there was always the, oh, what about, instead of bleeping doing something. Like, do something. And if you wait another decade to secure public financing, you're never going to get anything done. you'll never do anything.
T.
That wasn't a question. Sorry. That was
no,
just...
you're playing all the hits today, buddy. These are like, that is exactly the issue at hand. Is one, something has to happen anyway, right? It's just not feasible to continue along this path given the structural concerns that exist for the stadium. Something has to happen. Okay. They know that. Everybody knows. Like, no, even the people that are against this are not going to debate the need for something to happen. The question is the gamble on big revenue generation, is that the approach, right? Or is it, hey, do the bare minimum of what needs to be done to keep the stadium upright, right?
Mhm.
Spend that amount of money, spend that small amount of money, do it prudently, fiscally, conservatively, etc., and preclude yourself from having the opportunity to make that bigger money and generate that revenue on the backside for however many years it takes moving forward. Like, that's a legitimate debate. It's a legitimate concern, and I'm not going to discount it. But at the same time, this has been the MO.
You will never save up enough money to do this because the cost continues to rise.
Exactly.
All the time.
Like, people talk about Jerry World and $1 billion for AT&T Stadium down in Texas, right? Like $1 billion. Are you kidding me? That was a bargain.
Yeah.
That was cheap. Those are cheap things, comparatively speaking, to what it is going to cost to have this moving forward. And for Penn State, it's like, man, this is rubber meets the road time, where it has been put off and put off and put off. And to Sandy Barber's credit, and not to her credit, but it wasn't her fault. Her tenure at Penn State was started with the worst scandal, right? This horrible thing that happened that cost $100 million plus to the university and to the athletic department. I mean, all of those things went into where it is right now. But where it is right now is, hey, this is a conversation and something that should have probably happened 15, 20 years ago. Right. And now it's like, oh, you got to do something. You got to figure this out. And they're trying.
A couple of questions here from the chat. Just a Dude asks a question of how will capacity be affected. No one has said anything other than it will be diminished over time. But the question beyond this question, Nate, is what you brought up before. Does Penn State have the premium luxury clients? Because across football, stadiums are getting smaller, and attendance in college football has gone down from the 100,000 seat stadiums, these meccas that everyone comes to. Now people are watching on TV because you can, and it's a great experience. Does Penn State need to maintain capacity because they've bucked those trends of having an average near 100,000 over the last 5-6 years? So how are they trying to play that in this renovation, to what you understand?
One, capacity is going to be reduced to a certain extent.
Yeah.
I think that there is a question at hand here, right? Do Penn State fans like coming to Penn State football weekends for the nostalgia, to watch the team, because it's a relatively, comparatively speaking, a relatively inexpensive endeavor, right? If you compare it to going on vacation or something, right? Even 2 nights of hotel and all the expense, it sounds expensive. It is expensive, but comparatively speaking, it's not that bad, right? Like it is, you can do that at a certain price point and not have it be the worst thing in the world.
Nate doesn't stay in the studio Verbo when he goes on vacation, it sounds like.
In any case, the point is, there is a gamble that there is a clientele out there who will be on board with this and can afford it and want to do it and want to spend that kind of money to have that weekend in State College. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but it is something that I think they know there is a fiscal necessity to make more money to support all of the things they want to support, because there's a bottom line here. Additionally, if you like women's athletics, if you like any of the non-rev sports, if you like any of those things that go into 31 sports at Penn State has to make more money immediately. That has to happen.
Yeah, this is the counter argument. We always want to give a voice to people who, not to be an echo chamber here, but C.H. Arnold says this is when a home renovation costs too much and you have to say no. Could just sit on the stadium for 10 years and build an endowment to finance the next stadium. It's not like the place is a dump. And he follows that up with 10 years, your interest rates will probably be low enough to finance and have a well-built endowment out to run it. That's not possible with today's rates. There's a lot of, sounds like, financial understanding in that second part. But Nate,
I hear what he's saying.
10 years?
That's the issue, is the timeline. I don't disagree with that concept. The Tough Trees project, that was supposed to happen right now, just got shelved because interest rates are real high, right? Or comparatively speaking, they seem high right now. There is a gamble being made, right? We are forgetting collectively that interest rates, mortgage rates, for instance, right, have at times in this country within the last 40 years been double what they are right now, right? They got to 13%. They got to 14%. That it's unheard of in our lifetime, right? You probably got one that's 5, right? Or 4 or 3. Like those are the things that exist or have existed within the last 10, 15 years. But you're gambling too, this notion that, okay, just save your money, and in 10 years, the interest rates will be so low that it makes it a more feasible project. That's not a sure thing.
Also, I also think there's a difference between personal finance, you and me, and what's a good decision for us, and business finance, where I'm not saying you should have a lot of debt. I don't think you should. Generally, it's good to stay away from debt, but if you're a large company and you need to, again, this is about pulling big levers, Nate. This is about getting capacity of revenue generation to a point where the margins are fine. And so you're not in that position now. And the idea that you're going in 10 years, that you aren't going to be so far behind the curve, especially in the Big Ten, where you're competing against the best of the best, it's not just about the finance of the stadium. It's about the full picture, it seems.
It is. And one of the things that Penn State has that separates it from other programs is the size of the stadium, right? That potential. It's so funny because I have this distinct memory of, it was definitely Sandy, and I'm trying to remember if it was Bill O'Brien or James Franklin, but it was a coach's caravan thing probably 10 years ago. And they were pounding the notion of tickets sold, right? It was like tickets sold. And in my head, it was, well, what difference does it make? You're making all this money off of the Big Ten network and the Big Ten television deals. But the answer that was an education for me was, no, this is having 30,000 more seats for sale in your stadium, as opposed to Purdue and Indiana and Northwestern and all of these lesser Big Ten teams traditionally, is the difference. That's the difference. All of this stuff where every Big Ten team gets the same cut of the pie, that puts you all on an even playing field. What are you doing? What do you have as a program that separates you? In the SEC, for instance, right? Alabama makes the money that makes. It has a 95,000 seat stadium, blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
What do SEC schools not have on the books? Like 20 teams.
Right. 20 different programs that they have to fund.
Right. So Alabama has 17 D1 programs, athletic programs. Penn State's carrying 31. Yeah. That differentiates. That's the margin. That's the stuff. So I mean, there's a lot wrapped into this for sure.
Last question for you, and then we're going to get to the BWI mailbag. The gamble, as you proposed it, of spending $700 million to make more money to finance all of these things. Is it a good gamble? Do you think it'll work? Do you think the bet is worth it?
Hang on one more time. I need you to rephrase that.
Okay, so you said there is a certain aspect of this that is a gamble of gambling that spending this money will lead to more money from premium seating and upgraded costs. Do you think it's a good gamble? Do you think that this is a sound strategy that can work for Penn State?
Yes. Maybe.
Perfect.
I need to see and want to see. I don't think Penn State fans have an appetite for that. Okay. I don't think that's the targeted demographic here. The targeted audience are corporate partnerships. It is businesses. It is businesses will have suites. Businesses, right? So all of these, it's almost like a country club membership where you personally, right, don't have the country club membership, but your bank, right, the bank that you work for does. And those, like, that's the audience that this stuff is marketed toward and is geared toward and has the amenities for. All of that stuff is for them. And my question is the breadth of that community in central Pennsylvania and its surrounding environs, right? New York, Philly, DC, all of that stuff. Is that at the level that they're going to buy in on that? Is Citizens Bank, PNC, AT&T, Verizon, right? Are all of those companies going to pay for those things? I don't know. Maybe. Yeah. Maybe. We'll see.
So not for the proletariat, not for us here that are hanging out. I don't know. Maybe we have some corporate hangout, the BWI Live show here in the chat. If you're a corporate executive hanging out, hey, how you doing? But we'll get to some of the other conversations here surrounding Penn State football this week in the BWI Mailbag. And our show is at full strength. Welcome, Sean Fitz. Glad to have you on the show today.
You know, I flipped it on and I heard you guys talking interest rates and economic stuff. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to pour another cup of coffee, clean my glasses, and I'll let Nate handle this one. So, hey, what do we got going with football?
Yeah, football stuff. Let's get a football question on the show. And then I do want to get to a couple more things outside of the football program because Nate has to get going here in a minute. I want to get these mailbag questions that I think he has a strong handle on. So let's get to this one for you, Fitz. JWing25 asks, any under-the-radar 2025 guys who may blow up after camping at Penn State? When that does happen in the past, how does Penn State keep it under wraps? Fitz, are there guys that you're interested, like, I want to see this guy at camp and get some info on him that you have in mind as we get into June coming up with those camps during the summer?
Yeah, there's a couple guys that we're watching the first weekend of June camp. It's really interesting because these are guys that have that check mark beside their names, but not necessarily the ability to act on it. So there's a couple in there. Armory Hills from Maryland's one that jumps out to me. You look at guys that are in that Peter Gonzalez situation from last year where you're like, okay, we need to just check off a few more boxes. And then maybe all of a sudden they set up an official visit. Things are good to go. So I think he's in there. Keanu Johnson from Connecticut is, or from New England. I think he's Connecticut off the top of my head. He came and ran a 4.44 last year, but you know, his tape, I think, left some questions about what he can do football speed wise. So that first weekend of June, and I know it's coming up real quick. But it's going to be something to watch for because you've got to figure out if these guys can cut it at this level athletically, or maybe you need to see instincts that you're not seeing on tape and things like that. So it has happened. And, you know, honestly, it's the guys that probably we haven't talked about a ton that you're maybe writing off at this point because we haven't talked about them a ton, but there are still guys that want to go out there and camp and earn their offers. And I think there's something to be said for that. It was Gonzalez last year. There's been a couple of guys that have come through in the current class. So the camps are so forward focused on 2026, 2027 that there's still a sprinkle of guys that are in there. So those are a couple of guys, but I think when that first weekend camp, I think June 2nd is, no, it's not June 2nd. That was last year. That first weekend of June when they start having their elite camps is when we'll see some more guys. So I'm excited to scout those guys because, like I said, they're built a little bit differently. And I think
they're a little more rare too now, right? Because we have so much information, we can get so much information. And, these prospect camps, hundreds of kids come through the year before and we get a baseline on them. So there's just fewer guys to surprise us now, it seems. Is that right?
Yeah, so you've got the spring evaluation period where you can go watch them work out, and that's great. But you want to get them under your teaching. Like you want to bring in an offensive lineman to work with Phil Troutwine. You want to bring in a wide receiver to work with Marcus Higgins to see what they've got and then see them compete and watch them compete. So yes, that is rare. Most of these guys, most of their recruitment is in the rearview mirror. You're looking at official visits and things like that, but there's still some really good athletes out there that can actually, take a spot in a class like Penn State. So I'm excited to see it. It's always one of my favorite parts of camp season. You look last year, and Penn State had a couple of guys, and they didn't end up panning out for Penn State, but putting up ridiculous athletic numbers. And that's a big way to get on. There was the DN from South Jersey, jumped 11 feet. Kid might end up in the combine one day. I think he signed with an FCS program, but he might end up in the portal, might end up in the combine. Those are the guys that I'm looking at for potential, not just this class, but in the future as well.
Nate, I want to give this question to you. And again, sometimes it's not necessarily an in-depth question. It's just I want to spin you up and let you go. Yeah, this is something we've talked about, and I think it's important because people are still asking questions like this. Is there an NIL database that compares actual payouts, and take-ins? Is there a public record to compare teams so that we have an accurate picture of where PSU stands in the Big Ten? Lots of accounting questions today, Nate. So go ahead, answer this question.
No. The answer is no. There is no public database. Is something coming where now I don't think it's going to be public, but there are NCAA rule changes set to take place on August 1st that will formalize more the agreement being made. And I believe the intent there is to protect student athletes more from kind of the world that currently exists of being told they're going to get something and then not getting that or getting less than that. But yeah, that's not how it works.
That's the whole point of what's going on right now. And Fitz, I know that recruiting is rife with these things of what's an accurate number, what is realistic, and the different disparities are a lot of what's going on in recruiting right now. Outside of what I think Penn State focuses on, what we talk about which is making sure they retain their own players on the roster with NIL.
Yeah, I think that's key. There's a lawsuit that just came out today. I mean, with Jaden Rashada is going to sue essentially Florida, Billy Napier, the guy that's basically their, I guess their bag man that was writing the checks. That's going to make it really interesting in terms of transparency. I think it's a big time shift for that. I don't think you're going to see salaries published, and I know people want to see it. I think probably for the wrong reasons. You want to know how much you can root against someone because of it.
Is there a situation like in the NFL? You have a collective bargaining agreement. We understand that what the salary cap is. It's actually a whole separate fun side of the thing for people who like math and fitting all the puzzle pieces together. If there's a collectively bargained agreement with the TV money, is there an avenue in the future for that kind of one-to-one mirror the NFL?
I don't think you're going to see certain salaries published, but if you break up that money, because it's a percentage of the TV earnings and things like that, if you break that up, you can get a good idea of roundabout salary. Using salaries. It's not a salary, but using that amount of money compensation that's out there. I think you're going to be able to get a general idea, but on top of that, you're going to have NIL, and I think it's going to be treated just like it is right now, because schools don't want that out there. Players don't want that out there. Like, nobody wants that out there on that side.
Yeah.
I think the fans want it out there because, like I said, they can know how hard you can cheer against someone who's making money, because a lot of fans don't like them making money.
Right. Nate, what's going on your side here? Do you have a couple more minutes, and is there anything you want to add to this here? To this conversation?
I am trying to get into the Board of Trustees meeting and am so far unsuccessful. So it may be time for me to depart. Is there one more? Is there anything out there? I can give one final goodbye.
Just what's coming up from you after this? If people want to read your insight, go to bluewhiteillustrated.com. 2 months for $1. Use code PSU1. That is because you listened to Nate here on the show. You listened to him and I talk about finance, which probably made you dumber. But you want to get the good stuff. Code PSU1. 2 months for $1. What are you looking for to write about and to tell people the inside scoop about later today once all of this goes down?
Yeah, I want to see what people say publicly, and then I'll comment on it and whether or not it's true.
I love it. Nate Bauer, the BS meter. We'll have him over at bluewhiteillustrated.com. Thanks again for being here. I know that there's a lot going on. Appreciate you still taking time today to be on the show. Fitz, let's get into some of these other, as you mentioned, football questions. And of course, we've got Fitz's recruiting update coming up at the end of the show, which we normally get to at the beginning of the show. So we still got that, so stay tuned. But if you've got any more questions for us here in the BWI Mailbag, throw them in, and we'll have that conversation about some interesting topics. Probably not related to all the stuff that Nate was talking about, because the expert just left. But here's a good one. Scott L. says, who moves to the fourth safety to take King Mac's spot? This might be different than who is the next guy, but who do you think is the fourth safety right now based on what we know?
Yeah, so there was a pretty big gap between the third guy and King Mac, who I like. Again, I'm high on King Mac. I think he's going to be successful as a good player for Alabama. But there was still, from experience, from all that kind of stuff, there was still a gap. Now that gap gets even bigger, because you've got Lamont Payne, you've got Dakari Nelson, you've got Vabu Toure, Dejon Lane, who, by the way, freaking flying right now. That kid went from 11-3 in the 100 to 10-6 in the 100 in a year.
That was shocking.
And he's big. Like, if somebody posted Towson Knit posted the race, and he's going against Brandon Finney, who he beat. Brandon Finney, who ran a 4.91. Brandon Finney's pretty fast. But Lane is over 200 pounds, and that's moving right there. Yeah. So it's probably me talking about the thing that you can't see, because every time these guys get to campus, you discover the holes in their game that are going to keep them from playing early. Like, we can look at Dejon Lane and say, oh man, this guy's got speed, he's got size, he's got all this. But we said the same thing about Dakari Nelson last year. And I'm not sure that Dakari Nelson's going to be ready to take that role this year. That's kind of where we're at with that. So yeah, it's a big mystery right now. Vabu Toure had a good spring, and I think he's settling into the structure of the program in terms of lifting, in terms of eating and things like that, which was, it was going to be a big jump for him. And I think that he has ground to make up, or ground to cover in the next year. I think he can do it. But I mean, you're going to see those three safeties, and that's going to be pretty much it. Like, you're not going to want to go to a four safety. And that's kind of the luxury of having King Mac around, was if one of those guys gets a stinger, one of those guys gets hurt, knock on wood, he could step in there and sort of soften that blow. This is something that you and I have talked about before. Like, do you go to a fourth safety, or do you go to a third corner, or a fourth corner, even with the experience that you have at corner with, bigger-ish corners like Cam Miller, like AJ Harris, experienced guy like Jalen Kimber? I would probably lean that way. Like, you're going to obviously want to have the versatility of three safeties, but you're also going to want to have the versatility of your best players back there. So I think if it's a matter of going to a fourth safety versus going to a third corner, that's probably going to go to the corner.
Yeah, especially considering the depth they have at linebacker right now in some of those situations, which of course Nate's talked about. Abdul Carter, they can use him if they need to, but again, you're hoping to make these transitions as smooth as possible, and splitting a guy's time isn't allowing him to develop at that particular position he's moved to. The other part of this that I think affects the question is kind of like that Sam linebacker position. What's the position that a guy can handle first, and which one is... Both safety positions are hard, by the way, because you got to understand the full defense and the coverage shell and how motion and stuff affects you. but generally younger guys have played at that field safety position, and the boundary safety, which has more run game, a little more mature of a football player, needs to have, the shoulders to handle wrapping and tackling. That guy is usually, these are kind of general conversations, usually a veteran. So King Mack fitting in at that field safety position was perfect because you could move some guys around. Now, I would say Lamont Payne is the next guy at that field safety who just moved to safety. And so I think that's a further complication because you're not going to move anyone other than, as you mentioned, anyone other than Jalen Reed into that nickel lion spot. So it's a problem.
And you look at the other side of that rotation, you drop Abdul Carter to play a little bit of will, you flip Tony Rojas to play that field linebacker. You start to have options against different attacks, against teams that are going to run the football. Looking at the schedule, it's not your typical Big Ten anymore, but at the same time, you're going to need 3 linebacker sets at one point. And I wouldn't be shocked if it was Carter, Kobe King, and Tony Rojas playing linebacker in those opportunities.
And this is a great question. I don't know if you've seen this one, so I'll try and vamp for you for a little bit. But RD24 says, what are some potential trap games going into the season? So I do think that I'll answer this question in non-answer because I do think it matters how good this team is because the trap game is a game you're overlooking because you're looking at a different game. So how do they start with all this newness on offense? Do they get through the West Virginia game with a win? Do they get into the meat of their schedule undefeated? So you then create these trap games. And I think as far as variability, total variety of outcomes from 2024, I think there's a wider variety than what we've said of Penn State in recent years, which is, they're a 9-win, 10-win team. And if they don't have the resiliency for an early loss to then rebound and finish strong or whatever happens, there might be a little more variance this year in the schedule. Again, as we pointed out, that the schedule's better. There's better teams on there with some of those West Coast teams. So Fitz, given all that context, do you still have a game that you look to and you think, okay, maybe that is a game they've got to pay attention to where they might let their focus slip to elsewhere?
I think there's one just screaming at you, and that's Wisconsin on the road. Coming off of a bye week, we're going to have the conversation of James Franklin's record after a bye week, which should be 1 win higher after the first bye week, which comes after Bowling Green. But you move on, you go on the road to USC. You're probably gonna have to travel early. You're gonna come back, cross country trip. You get the week off, which is great because you need that time back between those trips. But at the same time, you go to Wisconsin, not an easy place to play. I'm not sure how Wisconsin's going to stack up man for man, like on paper against Penn State, but that's gonna be a tough game. And
that's not a game that you're playing 3 linebackers, by the way. They're spread offense under Luke Fickell now.
Well, it's funny because I was thinking that earlier when I mentioned Rojas, and I'm like, I was about to mention Wisconsin. I'm like, that's not how they do things anymore. So that's why it's not your grandfather's Big Ten. But yeah, Wisconsin is there because you've got Ohio State the next week. Everybody's gonna be looking forward to that one. So like quintessential trap game right there in terms of that. Minnesota on the road is interesting. I don't know how good Minnesota is going to be, especially by November when, teams of that tier are usually pretty beat up. You've got, you go to Purdue in the 16th, you've got Maryland to end the season. So not daunting in any stretch, but at Minnesota, what are you playing for at that point? If you're playing for a playoff spot, it's probably not a trap game or anything like that. But like, that's just one that you it's like Illinois last year. It's like the situation kind of scares you a little bit more than the team there. As Tom mentioned, could be a snow game. Eventually, I really enjoyed going to that stadium last time that I was out there. It's really cool, but it's also freezing. So yeah, there's that. And you mentioned West Virginia. West Virginia's not a trap game. Like Penn State is preparing for West Virginia to be a good football team. Like that is this is not catching them off guard. I don't think it's a situation like last year. And of course they go into every game thinking that the team is probably better than, they even if they are, it's like Joe used to say about Toledo and Bowling Green, this is a good football team. Oh yeah. Well, maybe it wasn't, but West Virginia has some holes to patch up, but they've also got talent. They run the ball very well. They've got an experienced quarterback. You're playing what is likely to be a noon game on August 31st in Morgantown. So maybe that helps you a little bit in terms of getting there. And I think Penn State's the better team, and the spread shows it. But, it's still pretty tricky.
Yeah. Oh, I just meant that's a game they could lose this year because of all the newness. Not that they would overlook it, just they might lose it. And then are you in a mindset to overlook teams after you start the year with a loss? So it's an interesting schedule this year, and there a lot of. You talked me into a lot of trap games. I was thinking maybe there weren't a lot, and now I'm like, okay, there's a bunch on the schedule that you need to be aware of. Because
Yeah, and I don't consider
situation.
USC I don't consider USC a trap game. I consider that a big game, you know.
Yeah.
So there's that. You know, they should be okay. Illinois, I'm very curious to see because they're stacking in the portal, which could be good, could be pretty hollow in the spring portal window. I don't know how that's going to work out. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting schedule because it's tough. But then there's certain pockets where you're like, okay, they'll be able to hold their own here pretty well.
So this question comes from Lamgul on the Blue White Illustrated message board. This is something we've talked about, pros and cons of the new helmet rule. And he says, wouldn't the new helmet communication rule favor up-tempo offenses and unorthodox creative play callers? Offense coordinator has 25 seconds to talk to the quarterback. The DC is making final play call adjustments, and you can kind of confuse and short circuit that if you are a creative play caller who uses motions and shifts and things before the snap. James Franklin talked about the up-tempo part not necessarily having any advantage when you have the helmet communication because you still need to communicate from the sidelines, at least from a sign-stealing perspective. So do you think that this is a net advantage for Penn State? Do you think they can take advantage of these things given the style of play from Andy Kotelnicki?
I think they can. The biggest thing here is not tempo. It's not the unorthodox creative play callers. It's the experience. Like, and you know, you've got a year of Drew Aller, so understand that he should probably have seen more and during his first season on campus. So I think that's where it helps you the most is if you've got experienced guys. Now, this is a new coordinator and a new coordinator quarterback connection here. So it might take some time for them to get on the same page. Like, if you had John Clifford doing this, like, I think that's a distinct advantage when you talk about the things that he's seen and the calls that he's been able to make. It might take a little bit for Drew, but Drew has played a bunch of football, so I think it'll be okay for them.
And Drew talked a little bit about how they were working through these things during spring practice and how it was more maybe reminding of one thing or giving him a setup for the next play. So you can take some of that mental strain off of his plate so he can focus on other things instead of like creating some sort of subterfuge for the defense. That part is taken care of by the play call. This is more supplementing so that the offense runs more efficiently is the way they described it. So I'm interested to see because I do think that there is a large variability here that can help. And then the other thing is you notice in the NFL, helmet communication on the road, these are where home and away splits are big advantages for the home offense if you've got that communication and you can hear. And the defensive side of the ball, when your offense is on the road, the communication becomes more difficult. And so working through those things and not getting delay of game penalties, I think is going to be big.
Yeah, it's going to be different. Different's not always good. Different's not always bad, but it's going to be different. It's going to take some adjustment.
I'll get to some of these here for you. This question from CJ Philly, he says, is there any positive vibes about Drew in the locker room about becoming a more vocal leader? Not saying he has to beat Trace McSorley, but is he growing more into that role? Do you have any insight or anything you want to add to this conversation? Because I know it's a big thing that's happening this summer with individual player workouts and getting together and throwing.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the job, and I think he's done a nice job with that. I don't have any new insight on that. And I think that he's becoming more of it. I saw him at the Elite 11 this weekend. Seems pretty comfortable with where he's at. Now it's going to take some more. And especially when you take into account trying to be the messenger for Andy Kotelnicki, trying to get everybody on the same page to do the right thing, to run the right option routes, to do those things, because we saw that last year it was almost a take it from Mike Yursich or take it from Jaywan Sider and Ty Howell to communicate to the whole offense. Well, it's got to go through somebody, and it's got to go through Drew, and Drew's got to take that on himself. I don't have much to add to this. No.
This one from Poncho 570 says Penn State as a program are overall arguably fourth in the Big Ten. Where would you rank them in the other Power Four conferences? So being fourth in the Big Ten might not be bad if you're fifth in the nation. Fits. I guess generally, do you see a change in where their standing is given the attrition of NIL and all these things that have created some upheaval in the general process over the last year and a half?
Not really. This is one that I've given zero thought to, so I don't know what to tell you. Yes, I mean the best teams in the Big Ten and the SEC are going to be the best teams, and they're going to be the ones that are favored when going into the playoff selection committee or whatever it's going to be. So I don't think it really matters where they stack up in the Big 12. They would be near the top, I'm guessing. At the top. I have done no prep for this question whatsoever. Sorry.
That's fine. The question behind the question is, are they in the top 12? Like, bottom line, are they in the top 12 to get into the playoff, or have they slid to like 15? And I think that there's been so much change recently, and there's still the rules in the college football playoff that you're getting automatic bids from conferences that don't, like, it's not going to just be the best 12 teams. It's going to be like, is there a path for you to get into the playoff still? And the Big Ten and SEC are obviously going to lobby to get as many of their teams in as possible. But there's no guarantee that that's going to be the case in the upcoming college football playoff situation. Let's get to now what I think we're excited to talk about, and that is the recruiting update from a very busy weekend in May that just was for Penn State football. So Fitz, the Elite 11.
Was that you? Was that you on the guitar? Was that
yes,
playing your own? That's very nice. I like that.
Yes, I not only can I do graphics, I also know how to play the guitar. I don't. So big weekend. Where do you want to start? Because there was an official visit. There's several camps. There's a lot of news coming out about the Nittany Lions. Where do you want to start with updating everybody on Penn State recruiting from this past week?
Let's start with the official visit. Yosei Epinesa, not back on campus for the first time. Again, I've said this before, I think it's going to be tough for Penn State to get the first visit and then sustain any momentum they have coming out of that over the span of the next 4 weeks. It's going to be tough. But you've got an opportunity here. And you look at the comments that he made to Steve Wiltfong. And by the way, that was on 3. Check it out if you get a chance. A lot of surprise, which tells me that Penn State was not painted as such by some people that maybe they're recruiting against. Do I smell a rat? I don't know. But you look at the competition. It's pretty funny. But no, I think the family was surprised by what they saw. I think they got connections with the staff. They mentioned several times that the staff has a deep connection to Penn State in that there's Pennsylvania guys, there's Penn State guys, there's guys that, weren't on the team all that long ago, Jordan Lucas, for example. So like you've got, you find that family atmosphere in the family that it is cultivated. And that's what the coaching staff right now. So I think Penn State helped themselves. Again, it's going to be tough for them to sustain this over the next 5 weeks, but I think getting one of those visits and them essentially going out of their way to visit Penn State to fit them into their schedule, I think it says something. It's going to be tough. Really good player, defensive end, maybe a defensive tackle. He's a big kid. Yeah. Maybe a defensive tackle at the next level. But one of those top tier targets from out of the region that Penn State's going after on the D-line.
How would you characterize what they would need to do in order to turn the tide? Because they had their visit, and I mean, is it a one-shot thing? Can they be in communication? Can they visit him again at some point? If they can even say, just make him delay his decision, make him rethink things so he doesn't announce after all of his official visits are completed. What is the path to success here, do you think?
Well, I still think he would like to decide before the season. So getting him back on campus, nearly impossible. I wouldn't label it completely impossible because you have that weekend in July where they have the Lash Bash that you could possibly get guys back on campus. There's one thing about setting the bar, and it's that bar, once it's set, especially on a first visit, can probably move pretty easily. So you got to knock, we're going to hit all the cliches here. You got to knock it out of the park. I think Penn State did an excellent job. Is enough for a kid from Illinois that it's got ties to Iowa. That's a tough sell, but I think Penn State's in it. Like, I think coming out of it, they were very impressed with the Penn State staff.
And it's going to be an interesting one because he would be a really valuable addition as far as a guy who you can see a path to him contributing early with some upheaval coming up at that position where there might be opportunity for a guy to come in who's big, strong, long, physical, and has an NFL brother you can see in his tape, like the way he plays and his level of advanced play at the position. So I think it's an interesting recruitment and one that I'm excited to follow as we go through this.
Yeah, and if you're looking at the competition here, and he's got those 5 official visits that are the 4 that are there to come to Missouri, to Iowa, to Utah, and Miami. That's not exactly Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State. Like, there's an opportunity there. Like, and this is a guy whose brother's in the NFL. They've seen the development. Like, what usually guys are, kind of blinded with all the flash and the recruiting and things, but you've seen the development. Of course, Iowa, does an excellent job with that. And Miami's put guys in the first round that have, essentially been on the brink of retirement or actually have retired and come back and played in the first round. So there's development at all these places, but Penn State's done a really good job with that. So I think that there's an opportunity there to win it, because this is not exactly the blueprint of the national recruit that you would think with a top 100 player.
What's next in your recruiting rundown or recap of this past weekend?
Well, you and I were at Memorial Field, downtown State College, for the Elite 11. Excellent event put on by Brian Stumpf and his crew. Always good. A long day for quarterbacks. A lot of balls being thrown. Also a long day for pass catchers. Andrew Olish was there all day. Brady O'Hara was there all day, just running thousands of routes to as the vessel for the quarterback. So no, but it was a good time. What do you want to start with? You want to start with quarterbacks? You want to start with position players?
Let's start with quarterbacks. Let's start with the guys that stood out to you or that were interesting to you as far as what you took away from that part of the day. And then we can get into some of the conversation around the pass catchers at the end.
All right. Got to start with Beckham Kritza because he's committed to Penn State. This is the second time I've seen him throw. Saw him at mini camp last year beside Ethan Grunkmeyer. I think he exceeded my expectations, to be honest with you. I'm been writing and been talking about, this is a guy that's got some question marks that come with the 4 different moves, and now he's back in Miami Central. So there's been a bunch of questions about this recruiting, but he goes out there, throws the ball extremely well. And what I like is his release. What I like is that the coaches were able to coach him up to get him in the right slot. And when he did, probably threw it as well as anybody there. Now, It wasn't the consistency of some of the other guys. Ryan Montgomery, who's committed to Georgia, was really good the other day. Matt Zollers was kind of in the Kritza blend of, like, when he hits it really well. But he's still got some work to do. So this guy is pushing 6'6". He's built like a flamingo. I mean, he is tall and skinny, plenty of room to fill out. But he also gets that he is a complete project. Like, he told me he's 20% of the quarterback that he thinks he can be. I mean, that's good. I don't do percentages, but to have 80% left of growth, let's hope he does for Penn State's sake. But I think, going in, I wasn't sure how he would stack up, but he hung in there with some other good national quarterback names, did a really good job. Again, long way to go for Beckham Kritza, but I think he exceeded my expectations this weekend.
So if you want to get more information, I wrote about that. Fitz wrote about it over at bluewhiteillustrated.com. Sign up right now. Use code PSU1. You get 2 months for $1. You get the inside information, including some of the numbers and the figures that we were able to gather out there to give you some context about the athletes that Penn State has either recruited or are trying to recruit at the quarterback position, and a lot of their targets and commits throughout the region were at the Elite 11. One thing I'm interested in, Fitz, let's stick with quarterback for a minute and then get back to some of those guys at the positional situations. You wrote about Dia Bell last night, having a chance to talk to him afterwards and having a chance to see him up close for the first time. What were your impressions about him, and what were your impressions about how he performed?
Very smooth, very poised. A guy, I don't think he's got the biggest arm in the class, but he is a guy that's got a lot of the fundamentals down. He looked like a guy that was a little bit older than, the rest of his 2026, 2027 group. But yeah, he put the ball on the mark several times. I think he's as he throws one away on the YouTube. So great timing by me there.
In my defense, I only got to see him a little bit because I was following the main group with all the guys we just talked about. So I have I emptied the chamber on what I had on Dia.
Yeah, Dia was good. He was poised. And like I said, when you're a son of a professional athlete, you kind of get there a little bit faster than everybody else. So he understands the situation. I talked to him afterward. He talked about Penn State. He was there on Saturday. I think Penn State's in the mix. I think I think they got a shot here. Of course, Texas is going to be one that's serious. LSU is going to be serious, and there's a bunch of schools that you could see him potentially ending up at. But he's been to Penn State as many, if not more, than any other school. Keeps coming back, and that's a good opportunity. He's got a great relationship with Danny O'Brien. Man, I talked to a bunch of quarterbacks this week, and even Matt Zollers, who's committed to Missouri. These guys love Danny O'Brien, so that's something to keep in mind for the future. If if the NCAA opens this floodgate for unlimited coaches, I think that's certainly a helpful cog in Penn State's offensive recruiting machine. So, but yeah, I like what I saw from Dia Bell. I mean, I think we have him 12th overall in the country. Be interesting to see where he goes up. I'm not saying he's going to fall or anything like that, but
Right.
he's going to be a top 100 guy. But 12th is really, really high. But then again, I'm pessimistic and conservative when it comes to that.
But it is. I think you make a good point in terms of flesh out that idea. He kind of blends into the crowd of his contemporary quarterback. So he doesn't have a singular trait of, he doesn't have an incredibly strong arm or a massive frame that you feel like he's going to be 6'5" and throw the ball downfield with a lot of velocity. But at the same time, like as much as you said, he looks like a kind of an older kid. I thought he clearly still has that youthful, like, I still have growing to do from a physical standpoint of putting on muscle and kind of changing your body over into what you're going to be as an adult. And I think that there's a lot of growth potential within his frame. The question just becomes, like, what are the upsides of these things? Because he's incredibly polished. Like, looking at him pass, everything looks easy and effortless. You brought this up, and this was in the BWI mailbag, so I do want to just quickly touch on this. Doug 21988 asks, not sure what the time frame is, but unlimited coaches. I would assume allow Penn State to have separate linebacker from DC coaches. You mentioned Danny O'Brien in that conversation. Seems like it's pretty important to keep him around. Do you have any insight on what the plan is for that, the voting, and when it could be implemented?
Yeah, that's one thing that got approved last year, and then it went to a vote and got struck down. I think there's questions about fairness, because a lot of these schools can throw 30 guys out there, and that's just a number. But then it becomes the Toledos of the world and all these other schools. How is it fair to them? So I think that was the big thing. So it's been approved again. It's going to go to a vote again. I thought it would pass last year. Seems like there's more support this year. Very much we will see. The second part of that question, Dan Connor's there, man. What else do you want? It's a Penn State guy.
Yeah.
I mean, no, but he's one of those guys like an O'Brien on the defensive side of the ball. Really respected. I think he was a big part of Anthony Specca's commitment, Alex Tash as well. Like, they kind of click with Dan Connor. So it's probably a conversation to be had here of, when you go to unlimited coaches, maybe they're a little bit more anonymous. This is not a situation. I mean, you can sit there and name the 10 assistant coaches off the top of your head for Penn State. Most, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably can. But like, if you get to it and you have 25 coaches, hey, you're not going to know, some of these analyst names. Like, you're not going to know
the assistant cornerback coach or the
Correct.
assistant running back coach is not somebody who's going to be, unless they were a famous former player.
Yeah, I was just trying to pull names from the analyst pool last year and realized a bunch of them left. So, and that's normal. That's normal. That's not a thing. Yeah. So I was going to say Gabe Infante, and then I was like, oh, that's right. He's a defensive coach at Duke now. So, yeah, there's that. So, that's what I would say about that is, you see guys in that role that you think can be coaches, sort of helping out there, and helping out's an abstract term, because they obviously do a lot.
Yeah. So we're going to get into a lot of these conversations. There's a lot of great questions in the chat. The Harrisburg Spring Fling, Ryan went to that last week. Of course, he was at the Under Armour camp in Baltimore, and we've got more to talk about on the recruiting show, including previewing the official visits coming up in just a little bit, because those, not this weekend, but the weekend after, the rubber meets the road. So any final thoughts on recruiting you want to get to before we get out of here on the show today, Fitz, and kind of preview maybe some other conversations you want to have this week?
There was a question in the chat. Is Trinity running back still on board? Messiah Mickens. He went to Harrisburg. That was during the spring, maybe the winter sometime. He's going to suit up for Harrisburg this year. Yeah, he's still on board. He was on campus this weekend. So there's actual yeah, he's still on board. I mean, that's going to be a situation where I think he'll pop up at other schools. There's some connections there. If you take a look at nationally at some of these travel groups like California Power and things like that, a bunch of their guys will pop up at different schools. Mickens has already popped up at UCLA and USC, I believe it is. So I wouldn't be shocked to see him just sort of, surface at some of those schools. But at the same time, he's got a really good relationship with Jaywan Sider, and he knows that Pennsylvania running backs are pretty well taken care of at Penn State.
Last thing here is from Eggman. He says, when there's no actual football, I rely heavily on BWI content in order to survive. Eggman, appreciate you saying that. By the way, like to his point, we're here 3 times a week all year long, except if I'm taking a vacation in July, and we'll let you know about that closer to then. But other than that, we're here every single week, at least 3 times a week, all year long. Tell your friends. This is not just an info dump for you. We're here to hang out, get to know you, have a conversation in the chat, and listen to the podcast, be a part of your life. So if you want to subscribe, let your friends know, subscribe to Blue White Illustrated here on YouTube, check out our podcast, and of course, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. That's where you get to all of it. That's where you get all of it here on the show. David K. liked your built like a flamingo. That was a great line, by the way. That was excellent, especially coming from Miami.
I've been workshopping that a couple days. I mean, it was a long day on Sunday, so I was going with stork, flamingo, but he's got these long legs and long, skinny arms. That guy is south of 200 pounds. I played basketball in college with a guy that was 6'7", 165, and he's built like, he's built like Hussein. It was very, very, very different build than you're used to seeing with a quarterback. But I stood face to face with him. I'm 6'4", and I'm looking up at him. He's pushing 6'6", and he's a big kid, and he will look, I think, nothing like this after a year at Penn State. I think this is a guy that's poised to blow up if he's got the bone structure to handle it, poised to blow up and he wants to be 205 when he gets here, be 225 by the end of his first year. There's a lot of room. And I say he'll look different, but him at 225 might not look much different than him at 205. Because that's the kind of frame we're talking about here.
I apologize. There's one last thing I promised we would talk about, and we didn't get to it. Just a quick recap of what you saw from the Penn State athletes that were non-quarterbacks at the Elite 11. Want to make sure we just get a brief conversation about that before we get going.
Yeah, Lyric Samuel, I think, looked fantastic. Put some clips up there on Twitter. He was probably, it was the top receiver on hand. A really good attention to detail, which we stereotype guys that are coming from New York City as guys that are going to have to eventually learn. He was very detail oriented in terms of getting off the ball, getting off the jam and things like that, which is really good to see. Still room to fill out. I mean, he's 6'3.5". You're in a 4.53, which matched his camp time from last year, which as T Frank, as we've talked about before, you hear 4.5 and you're like, okay, he's not a burner. At 6'3.5", that is freaking moving.
He's a big dude.
Yeah, he's a big guy. Matt Henderson was there, the tight end. He had to leave a little bit early, kind of tweaked a hamstring, but he held his own. He more than held his own. Looked really good catching the football. Andrew Olish, man, he looked excellent. He looked like, I don't want to say on par with Luke Reynolds last year, because Luke Reynolds just kind of dominated that whole day last year. But he was
against
up there.
Better competition too. I thought the defensive backs struggled a little bit. It was, Lyric Samuel and Andrew Olish were 10 yards open on some of the deep routes they ran.
Yeah, the problem with this camp is that you want to bring in certain guys, and then your defensive back group is 6 people. And they're going through, and I feel bad for those D-backs because you're one-on-ones, your back's against the wall the entire time, and then you got to eventually take a rep and then go take another rep, which is great for competition, but at the same time, those guys get tired pretty fast. So that is the downside. Scheduling it on the weekend of Under Armour in Baltimore, I got many opinions on that. I think it kind of hurt both aspects, because you look at Baltimore, what they had, and Ryan was down there, not a ton of quarterbacks going down there. So
yeah,
hopefully next year things get better and they can reschedule all that.
We'll talk more about that Baltimore camp. A lot of players. Brandon Finney is a big name this week at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com that Ryan spoke to, and that we've been talking about it on 3 as a rising prospect from McDonough, somebody who's going to be a big factor in Penn State's class and official visits, all that stuff. I'm spilling all of it. It's coming up Thursday. Make sure you subscribe to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com so you don't miss it. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. He's Sean Fitz. We'll talk to you later.